You sit down to work on something important, a draft, a video, a product, and at first everything seems fine. The task is clear enough, the document is open. Then the first sign of friction appears. The sentence doesn't sound right. The idea feels weaker than it did in your head. The page looks emptier than expected, and in that small moment of discomfort, your brain makes a suggestion. Let's check one example first. It sounds reasonable, so you check. The example is useful, maybe too useful. Now your own work looks worse by comparison, so you check another, then a tutorial, then your analytics. 30 minutes later, you return to the original task. The cursor is still blinking, the work hasn't moved, but your mind feels busy. So what's actually happening in your brain during these moments? And why is it so hard to stay with work that matters to you? Researchers who study attention have found that distraction isn't simply a failure of willpower. It's often the brain's attempt to manage discomfort. When a task creates friction, confusion, self-doubt, uncertainty, the brain searches for the fastest available source of relief, and in a digital environment, relief is almost always within reach. A new tab, a quick check, a tutorial that feels productive. Psychologist Gloria Mark has found that after even a brief interruption, it can take over 20 minutes to fully return to the original task. But the interruption itself often lasts only seconds, meaning the cost of switching far exceeds the relief it provides. What makes this especially difficult to notice is that modern distraction doesn't always look like procrastination. It often resembles preparation, research, planning, studying how others approach the same problem, and sometimes it genuinely is preparation. But when these activities consistently replace the work rather than support it, a cycle can form. Here's how researchers describe it. Friction appears when a task becomes uncomfortable. The brain identifies an easier alternative, checking email, watching a tutorial, reviewing analytics. That alternative provides immediate relief. And because the relief is fast and reliable, the brain learns to reach for it again next time. Over time, this loop can accelerate. At first, you might escape because the work feels uncomfortable. But eventually the work can begin to feel uncomfortable, partly because your brain has come to expect the escape. And each switch carries a hidden cost. Researcher Sophie Leroy coined the term attention residue to describe what happens when you move between tasks. Part of your mind remains occupied with whatever you just looked at. So after checking a tutorial, a dashboard, and a competitor's page, you don't return to the original work with your full attention. You return with a divided mind, which makes the task feel harder, which makes the urge to escape feel stronger. This helps explain why many people end their day feeling exhausted despite producing very little. The fatigue is real, but it comes from the cost of constant switching, not from deep engagement with the work itself. So how can you work with your attention rather than against it? Research points to 3 strategies that seem to help. The first is making the task specific. Vague goals tend to create vague resistance. Work on my project offers your brain no clear place to land and plenty of room to wander. But a specific target like write the opening 300 words or record a rough first minute gives attention somewhere to focus. Research on goal setting has consistently found that specific, challenging goals lead to higher performance than vague intentions to do your best. Specificity also helps expose avoidance. If the task is to write 300 words, checking analytics is clearly not that task. The second is designing your environment before friction arrives. Psychologist Wendy Wood's research on habits suggests that much of our behavior is shaped by our surroundings rather than our intentions alone. Waiting until you're already distracted to fight distraction puts you at a disadvantage. By that point, the brain is already negotiating for relief. Instead, reducing the available exits before you begin, closing unrelated tabs, silencing notifications, keeping only the working document visible, can make it easier to stay with the task when discomfort appears. The third is staying through what researchers sometimes call the initial resistance. The first few minutes of a task, when the urge to leave tends to be strongest. Studies on distress tolerance suggest that the ability to sit with discomfort, even briefly, can be strengthened over time. You don't need to commit to hours of unbroken focus. Even 10 minutes of staying with a rough draft or an awkward first version can begin to teach the brain a new pattern, that friction is survivable and that the discomfort of starting usually fades once you're engaged. Over time, this evidence accumulates. Each time you stay through that initial wave instead of switching away, the brain learns that the task is not as threatening as it felt. The urge to leave doesn't disappear, but it becomes easier to recognize and easier to let pass. So picture that moment again. You're sitting with a task that feels uncomfortable, and your brain suggests checking one thing first. Before you open the tab, it may be worth pausing on a simple question. Is this helping the work move forward, or is it helping me move away from the feeling of the work? If it helps the work, use it. If it helps you leave, the answer might be to stay a little longer. If this helped, consider liking and subscribing for more animated mental models without the motivational fluff.